"Congresswoman Crockett," he said, "how do you respond to those who say your policies are more about division than unity?" Before she could speak, a smirk cracked across Barron Trump's face. "Well," he interrupted, his voice a practiced blend of mockery and smug calm, "it's easy to push division when you've never had to build anything. Some people inherit responsibility, others inherit victimhood." The audience shifted uncomfortably. You could feel the tension stretch tight like wire. Crockett didn't move, she blinked once. Barron continued, emboldened. "I mean, let's be honest," he said, looking right at her. "We're not here to be lectured on patriotism by someone who spent more time on protest signs than in business meetings. Some of us come from people who have built towers. Some come from people who tear things down and call it activism." A gasp audible now, a ripple in the crowd. Someone near the front muttered, "Did he really just say that?" Jasmine's eyes didn't leave him. Calm, silent, her hands folded neatly in front of her, unmoved by the weight of his words. The moderator hesitated, unsure whether to cut in or let the moment play out. The camera zoomed just slightly on Jasmine Crockett's face, measured, still unflinching. Barron leaned back, proud of the provocation. He had come to provoke, to posture, to reduce her public defender turned congresswoman to a caricature of grievance, and he thought he'd succeeded. But Jasmine Crockett was studying him now, not reacting, calculating. And the next thing she said would not only flip the room, it would send shockwaves through every corner of the country. But what Jasmine said next, it didn't just silence the room, it rewrote the rules of the game. The event was billed as a conversation, but everyone knew it was a battle. A sleek primetime special on one of the country's most-watched networks promoted under the polished title, "Bridging the Divide, America at a Crossroads." A panel of politicians, heirs, influencers, and firebrands gathered to discuss the forces ripping America apart. Race, power, money, identity. But beneath the branding, the producers knew what they were really selling: confrontation. The studio was engineered for tension. Overhead lights spotlighted every gesture, every flinch. Millions were watching, not for consensus, but for spectacle. Social feeds were already poolsing with live tweets, GIFs, predictions. It was the Super Bowl of ideology, and two of its most symbolically loaded players were seated across from each other. On one end, Barron Trump, tall, slick-suited, his voice carefully groomed to echo the gravity of a last name that built skyscrapers and bulldozed boundaries. The youngest Trump, stepping into a spotlight he once avoided, now embraced. The right had anointed him as the next voice of patriot youth, a Gen Z heir to the MAGA throne. On the other end, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a former public defender raised in the heartbeat of the South. Fierce, precise, black, bold, and never once mistaken for quiet. A woman who'd earned every step to the House of Representatives by grinding against systems built to ignore people who looked like her. They weren't just two people on a stage. They were two Americas staring each other down. Barron represented the continuation of legacy wealth and insulated thinking, a reality where status is passed down like cufflinks and understanding is optional. Crockett carried the weight of every underfunded school, every ignored protest, every policy hearing where voices like hers were talked over but never heard. And that night, the stakes weren't just about debate points. They were about legitimacy, about who gets to speak with authority in this country, about whether power comes from a name or from knowing what it's like to fight for one. It was a made-for-TV moment, but it struck deeper. Because America has always been split down this very line. Those born into the room and those who had to knock, wait, and kick until the door opened. Barron came in expecting to control the narrative. He was armed with inherited talking points and the confidence of someone who'd never been seriously challenged. But what he didn't count on was what Crockett brought into that room. She brought lived experience, she brought pain, she brought pride, and most dangerously, she brought truth. Millions tuned in, expecting a spectacle. But what they didn't expect was who would control the room by the end. He grew up in the gold-plated corridors of Trump Tower, shielded from headlines yet shaped by them. For years, Barron Trump was a ghost in the political theater scene, rarely heard. A footnote in a dynasty too loud to leave room for subtlety. But silence can be strategic, and when he re-emerged older, taller, camera-ready, he was no longer a background figure. He was the next act. At first, it started small. A few cryptic tweets, book recommendations laced with ideological winks. Then came the podcasts invited on by influencers thirsty for a Trump 2 who spoke with the calm of prep school and the edge of generational grievance. He delivered. Barron positioned himself as the thinking man's nationalist, draped in tailored suits and talking points. He spoke of Western values under siege and the tyranny of cultural victimhood. It wasn't yelling, it was smirking. The kind that lets him say the unsayable, then hide behind a veneer of civility. He never needed to shout. His last name did that for him. Within months, he had a niche, then a following. Conservative youth forums invited him to speak. Op-eds praised his composure beyond his years. Political commentators labeled him the heir to the movement, as if ideology was inheritance. And slowly, Barron began to play the part. He invoked his father's legacy without mimicking his tone. He spoke of restoring pride, reclaiming identity, and taking back the narrative vague enough to protect, sharp enough to provoke. It worked. He tweeted snide references to liberal lawmakers, suggested that some people mistake volume for value, poked at climate activists, Black Lives Matter organizers, and anyone who challenged the myth of American exceptionalism. But always with plausible deniability. A joke, a quote, a rhetorical question, never a direct hit just enough to signal, to wink, to nod at the crowd who knew exactly what he meant. And the crowd grew. Right-wing media couldn't get enough. They dubbed him a new kind of culture warrior. Some even dared to whisper it, presidential potential. Still, critics remained skeptical. What had he built? What had he survived? What gave him authority beyond inheritance and algorithms? But those questions didn't matter, not to the people eager to crown him. He had the look, he had the name, he had the platform. And for a moment, it seemed like he might even have the narrative. Until that night. Until that stage. Until he looked across the table at someone who didn't flinch at legacies, or headlines, or careful jabs disguised as discourse. Barron had spent years learning how to talk like a leader. But he was about to meet someone who didn't play by DC's old rules. Before the Capitol marble echoed her heels, before cable news carried her voice coast to coast, Jasmine Crockett was a girl in a world that rarely made space for voices like hers. Raised in the cradle of working-class Texas, she knew early what it meant to speak loudly, not for attention, but to be heard through a system that constantly tried to mute her. Her first microphone wasn't a podium, it was a megaphone at protests no network covered. Her first courtroom wasn't grand, it was a cramped legal aid office where she defended clients nobody else would. Civil rights law wasn't a resume point, it was a calling. She didn't come from a political dynasty. She didn't have the luxury of stumbling upward. Every inch of power she gained was fought for, gritted out in hearings, shouted over in rooms where she was the only black woman present, and claimed through sheer refusal to sit down when told to. When Jasmine Crockett entered the Texas House, she didn't play politics, she played truth, and it showed. There was the moment during a voter suppression hearing when a colleague tried to silence her mid-sentence. She didn't flinch. She leaned in and said, "You might be used to talking over people like me, but not today." The clip ricocheted across social media within minutes. Civil rights leaders called it a masterclass in composure. Then came her first congressional floor speech. Cameras rolling, a room full of polished suits and skeptical stares. She didn't stumble, she soared. "I didn't come here for decorum," she said. "I came here to dismantle what decorum has been protecting." A viral eruption, hashtags, commentary, legacy. But her most powerful moments weren't the ones that trended. They were the quiet ones. The times she stood against a policy she knew would pass but stood anyway. The times she spoke in hearings when she knew no one would report on it. The times she shielded others with her presence alone. She became known not just as a voice, but as a force. Journalists started calling her unshakable. Commentators said she brought the fire and the facts. Civil rights legends said she reminded them of the old school, truth before popularity, people before party. Still, the scrutiny came, the dismissals, the whispers that she was too loud, too bold, too direct. She met each with the same steady defiance, not performative rage, but earned, anchored clarity. Because Crockett never needed to posture. She had the record, she had the scars. And behind every word she spoke was a truth too large to ignore. She didn't just walk into rooms that weren't built for her, she owned them. So when the producers invited her to that televised forum when they placed her across from the son of America's most brazen dynasty, some expected her to flinch, to pull back, to soften. But they forgot who she was. She didn't rise for attention. She rose because silence was never an option. And that strength, she was about to channel it against America's most privileged name. The moderator reset his papers, cleared his throat, and turned back to the panel. The tension still lingered from Barron's earlier swipe, uneasy, like static hanging in the air. "We've heard strong opinions," he said, "but let's go deeper. Congressman Trump, your thoughts on systemic inequality." Barron adjusted his cufflinks, smiled politely, then leaned forward. "Systemic inequality," he began, "is a phrase often wielded by those unwilling to discuss cultural responsibility. We've spent decades blaming structures, but at some point, personal accountability must take the stage." He glanced sideways at Crockett, subtle, measured, but intentional. "I mean," he continued, "when we keep telling people the system is rigged, we remove their agency. We rob them of ownership. Isn't that a form of soft bigotry?" The words floated for a moment, dressed in rhetorical flourish but sharp beneath the surface. Crockett didn't move. She blinked once, eyes steady. Barron kept going. "We can't fix inequality by legislating guilt. My generation doesn't want to apologize for things we didn't do. We want to build something new. Something post-racial, post-guilt, post-resentment." He smiled again. It was the grin of someone who thought he'd just outmaneuvered the room. The moderator turned to Crockett. "Congresswoman." She took a breath, not defensive, not angry, calm. "Interesting framing," she said. Her tone was even, almost disarming. "But let's talk about agency." Barron straightened. This was the part he liked: the performance, the rebuttals, the intellectual fencing. Crockett continued. "You mention agency," she said, "but agency without access is fiction. A lottery ticket isn't equity. Telling people to pull themselves up without giving them a floor to stand on isn't liberation, it's cruelty dressed as advice." Barron shifted slightly. The smile held, but his eyes narrowed. "I'm just saying," he interjected, "the narrative of oppression can be limiting." Crockett turned to him fully now. "Limiting to whom?" she asked, her voice sharpened. "To the people living it or the people tired of hearing about it?" A few murmurs in the audience. A tension building, not from noise but from anticipation. Barron leaned back, arms crossed. "I'm not here to be a villain," he said, chuckling softly. "I'm here to have a real conversation if we're allowed to anymore." The line was a trap, designed to frame her response as overreaction, but she didn't bite. Instead, she looked him in the eye, quiet and firm. "You want a real conversation," she said. "Then let's stop pretending that inherited comfort gives you clarity on struggle." A flashbulb popped from the press box. "You've never had to wonder if your name would be used against you in a job interview," she said. "You've never had to wonder if wearing a hoodie could cost you your life, but you want to lecture us on post-racial." The audience leaned in. The moderator said nothing. Barron smirked again, but it wasn't confidence now, it was armor. Crockett sat back, hands folded. Let the silence work, let it breathe. Because this wasn't about volume, it was about precision. And then, just when he thought he'd won, Crockett struck. Jasmine Crockett sat forward, not in anger but in certainty, the kind of stillness that made everything around her feel louder. The room wasn't waiting for her to speak, it was holding its breath. "You know, Barron," she began slowly, "you remind me of something my grandmother used to say." Pause. She said, "A loud rooster do mean it's morning." Laughter, not raucous but knowing, the kind that comes from truth wrapped in rhythm. Crockett continued, gaze never breaking from his. "You talk about post-racial this and personal responsibility, that like you've lived the weight of being dismissed before you even open your mouth." A soft shift in the audience. Someone whispered, "Here it comes." "You say you're not a villain. I believe that," she said. "Villains know exactly what they're doing. What you've got is worse entitlement with a microphone. That's not evil, Mr. Trump. That's dangerous." Barron chuckled tightly, eyes flickering toward the moderator, toward the cameras, then back to her. "You talk about building something new," she said, "but every brick you've stacked was handed to you by a system built to protect your kind of comfort. You call that vision, I call it revision." Another pause, let the words settle. You've never lived in a neighborhood where the school books come second-hand and the grocery store's a liquor store. You've never had your ID questioned 3 times while voting in your own district. She glanced at the audience now, her voice widening like a rising tide. And yet you lecture me on accountability. A murmur shuffling, one cameraman zoomed tighter. This isn't your father's America anymore, she said, leaning in, voice dropping a note. This is ours, the people who built it, bled for it, carried its promise through heat and hatred and kept believing in it anyway. Barron opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came. Just a twitch of the jaw, a blink that came too fast. Let me guess, Crockett said, eyes locked again. Now I'm being too aggressive, right? She smiled, not smug, but surgical. Funny how when we talk plain, it's always too much. When we ask for access, it's always too soon. But when someone like you monologues about pulling yourself up by bootstraps handed to you in a box marked Trump, that's supposed to be leadership. Scattered clapping, uncoordinated, raw building. You didn't earn that name, she said. But I earned this seat, every law I've studied, every case I've argued. Every night I spent prepping statements that wouldn't be taken out of context just because of my skin tone or my cadence or the way I wear my hair. Barron tried again, a breath in, a gesture outward, but the words came slow now, defensive. Well, I just meant. Crockett didn't interrupt. She didn't have to. The unraveling was loud enough. I'm not here to be palatable, she said. I'm here to be precise. A shout from the back, say that again. The moderator tried to speak, but paused, caught in the spell of the moment like everyone else. I'm not here to protect egos built in boardrooms, she said. I'm here to protect people forgotten in courtrooms. The applause broke fully now, not a standing ovation yet but a pulse of affirmation, heads nodding, hands clapping, viewers at home texting, did you hear that? Barron leaned back, arms crossed tight now. The smirk was gone. In its place, a boy in a suit watching a narrative he thought he owned slip out of his control. You wanted a real conversation? Crockett said. Now you're in one. And with that, she turned back to the moderator, folded her hands, and went quiet again. But while the crowd roared, the internet was just waking up. It started before the credits rolled. As the moderator thanked the panel, as the cameras panned to applause, phones lit up like wildfire across time zones. Within 5 minutes, #Crockett crushed it was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. The clip of her mic drop line, "This isn't your father's America anymore," was already clipped, captioned, and uploaded by 3 major accounts. At minute 8, the memes came, a split screen of Barron blinking and Crockett calmly folding her hands. The caption, "When you bring Monopoly money to a chess match." By hour 1, TikTok had dozens of remixes. One creator looped her closing words over Kendrick Lamar's DNA. Another cut it with scenes from Scandal, syncing Crockett's words with Olivia Pope's stare. Even apolitical viewers got pulled into the current. Tweets flooded the feed. I wasn't ready for Rep. Crockett to end this boy's whole career on live TV. Barron walked into that studio like it was a TED Talk and left like it was a roast. She said not palatable, precise, and I felt that. Late-night hosts couldn't resist. Jimmy Fallon aired a parody sketch titled Barron's Masterclass on Losing Debates. Trevor Noah reposted Crockett's speech with one word, bars. Even The View opened with it. Joy Behar called it one of the most necessary takedowns I've seen on national television in years. On Instagram, Viola Davis posted a clip with the caption, "Say it louder for the ones in the back." Bernice King quote-tweeted the video with a single flame emoji. Meanwhile, on the other side of the political aisle, damage control spun up fast. Conservative influencers went into defense mode. One tweeted, Crockett was aggressive, Barron stayed calm. The replies were unforgiving. Calm, he looked like someone unplugged his teleprompter. You mean he stayed frozen? Fox News tried a more measured spin. The Chiron read, Barron Trump faces unfair attack from far-left congresswoman, but even their panel couldn't ignore the optics. She was composed, one commentator admitted. He looked unprepared. YouTube exploded. Reactors posted side-by-sides, breakdowns, why this moment matters essays. Political TikTokers made threads. Commentary channels gave it titles like How Jasmine Crockett Rewrote the Debate Playbook. The ripple was cultural, not just political. High school students quoted her in speech class. Professors used it as a case study in rhetoric. Barbershops played it on loop. And in the middle of it all, Jasmine Crockett. She hadn't tweeted. She hadn't gone live. She hadn't posted a selfie or claimed a victory. She knew what everyone else was just beginning to understand. This wasn't about a moment. It was about a message. But for Crockett, this wasn't about viral fame. It was about something deeper. The cameras were different this time. Softer, one-on-one. No panel, no lights engineered for conflict. Just a quiet studio and a single chair across from a journalist known more for depth than drama. Jasmine Crockett sat with her legs crossed, posture relaxed but voice unchanged, measured, grounded. The interviewer leaned in. Congresswoman, that exchange with Barron Trump has gone viral. Over 30 million views in under 48 hours. What do you think happened in that room? Crockett paused. She didn't rush the answer. I think people saw a contrast, she said. Not between left and right, not even between generations, but between performance and purpose. The interviewer nodded. Crockett continued. You know, a lot of folks keep asking if I planned that moment. I didn't. I just refused to let someone decorate entitlement with intellect and call it truth. Another pause. I wasn't speaking just to Barron, she said. I was speaking to everyone who's ever been told they're too loud, too angry, too bold just for telling the truth. Especially black women, especially working people, especially those without a name that opens doors before they even knock. She looked into the camera then, not confrontational, intentional. This country's been told for too long that dignity is something you have to earn by being quiet, by not upsetting the room, but dignity isn't granted, it's claimed, and I claimed mine. Clips from that moment began to roll across the screen juxtaposed with past footage. Crockett marching in protests, defending clients pro bono, confronting colleagues on the House floor. It wasn't about the moment now. It was about the movement it reflected. The interviewer asked if she'd heard from Barron. No, she said, and that's fine because this was never personal, this was principle. She smiled, not the kind of smile that comes from victory, but the kind that comes from clarity. I don't want applause, she said. I want accountability. I want young people watching that clip to know they can walk into any room and speak the truth even if their name doesn't come with an elevator ride. Back in Washington, things were quieter. Barron declined interviews. His surrogates went silent. The buzz faded. But Crockett, she didn't ride the moment, she worked. Back to committee hearings, back to town halls, back to drafting legislation aimed at access, equity, and real opportunity. Because she understood something Barron hadn't. The mic drop wasn't the point. The point was what came after. And what came after was a country seeing, maybe for the first time in a long time, that power without empathy crumbles under the weight of purpose. America didn't just watch a debate. America saw what happens when power is confronted with purpose. When the dust settles and the cameras stop rolling, what's left isn't the viral moment, it's the choice it forces us to make. Because this was never just about a debate. It was about who we listen to and who we silence. Do we keep handing the mic to those born into platforms? Or do we start amplifying the ones who built their voices from nothing? Do we reward smooth talk wrapped in privilege, or truth spoken with the weight of lived experience? Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a moment, she exposed a pattern, and the echo of that moment, it's still moving. So ask yourself, when someone finally tells the truth in a room built to ignore it, will you clap quietly or stand with them? If you felt seen by what she said, drop in the comments. If you've ever been talked over, underestimated, or dismissed, hit that like button and subscribe. Because this platform, it's for the fighters, for the truth-tellers, for the ones who don't wait to be invited, they walk in anyway. Share this with someone who still thinks silence is strength. And remember, history doesn't favor the loudest voice. It favors the voice that refuses to stay silent. Whose side of history are you on?